the smell of lye soap cooling on the counter, a canning lid popping shut in a kitchen with no electricity. For generations, the Amish were dismissed for how they lived until science proved them right. Here are 30 banned Amish household hacks that scientists now say were genius. Your grandmother's cleaning cabinet probably held a dozen bottles. One for glass, one for tile, one for countertops, one for the stove. Amish households used 2 ingredients for all of it: white vinegar and baking soda, mixed fresh each time, handled grease, soap scum, mildew, and sticky residue without a single warning label. The acetic acid in vinegar dissolves mineral deposits and cuts through grime, while baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, works as a gentle abrasive that lifts stains without scratching. Together, they produce a fizzing reaction that loosens buildup in drains and around faucets. Modern lab analysis confirms that a 5% vinegar solution kills 99% of surface bacteria and 80% of common mold spores. The Amish didn't need the lab results. They needed clean kitchens, and this worked every single time. Amish children grew up barefoot in barns, breathing air thick with hay dust and animal dander, and they almost never developed asthma. In 2016, the New England Journal of Medicine published a landmark comparison between Amish farm kids in Indiana and Hutterite children in South Dakota whose families used industrial farming methods. Amish children had asthma rates 4 to 6 times lower. The difference came down to what they were breathing: a rich microbial stew of bacteria, fungal spores, and endotoxins that trained their immune systems early and aggressively. The researchers called it the farm effect. The Amish called it Tuesday. Their kids were in the barn before school, mucking stalls, feeding animals, pressing their faces into the sides of cows. Nobody told them they were inoculating themselves against allergic disease. They were just doing chores. No alarm clocks, no blackout curtains, no blue light filtering apps on a phone they didn't own. Amish households rose with the sun and wound down when it set. And researchers at the University of Maryland found that their circadian rhythms aligned almost perfectly with natural light cycles, a pattern modern sleep scientists now consider optimal for hormonal regulation and mental health. The average Amish adult slept over 7 hours a night with almost no reported insomnia. Melatonin production began naturally at dusk because there were no screens suppressing it, no fluorescent overheads tricking the brain into thinking it was noon at 10 o'clock at night. Seasonal mood disorder, a condition increasingly common in populations surrounded by artificial light, barely registered in Amish communities. The body knew what time it was because nobody had given it a reason to forget. You went to bed tired. You woke up rested. That was the system, and it ran on nothing but the rotation of the earth. The crock sat in the corner of the kitchen, heavy stoneware, a cloth tied over the top, the sharp smell of brine drifting out every time you walked past. Sauerkraut, pickled beets, fermented green tomatoes. The Amish packed raw vegetables in salt and water and let wild lactobacillus bacteria do the rest. No canning, no heat, no vinegar, just time and temperature. What they produced was a living food, dense with probiotics that modern gastroenterology now links to improved digestion, stronger immune response, and reduced inflammation. A single serving of traditionally fermented sauerkraut contains more beneficial bacteria than an entire bottle of commercial probiotic capsules. The Amish didn't measure colony-forming units. They measured by taste, sour enough to pucker, crisp enough to crunch. After the wood stove burned all night, the ash box got carried outside, not to the trash, but to the garden. Amish families had been scattering wood ash between their crop rows for generations, and the reason was as old as agriculture itself. Hardwood ash contains calcium carbonate, potassium, and trace amounts of phosphorus, the same nutrients sold in bags at the garden center under names like lime and potash. Spread thin across acidic soil, it raised the pH just enough to let vegetables absorb what was already in the ground. It discouraged slugs, repelled certain beetles, and dusted over a compost pile helped cut the smell while balancing nitrogen levels. The whole system was circular. The trees fed the fire warmed the house, the ash fed the soil The soil fed the family. Nothing left the property. Nothing was purchased. She saved the cooking grease in a tin behind the stove, bacon fat, lard drippings, the rendered tallow from a beef roast, and when the tin was full, she made soap. Mixed with lye water leached from the same wood ash that fertilized the garden, that fat became something entirely new. The chemical reaction, saponification, turned grease and caustic alkali into a hard, clean bar that lathered in cold water and stripped dirt without drying the skin raw. Amish women had been running this reaction for 200 years before the term surfactant entered any textbook. Dermatologists now point out that traditional lye soap, fully cured, has a pH closer to skin neutral than most commercial body washes loaded with synthetic detergents and fragrance. But nobody in those kitchens was thinking about pH. They were thinking about the cost of store-bought soap and the satisfaction of never needing it. Underneath the house, or dug into the hillside behind it, the root cellar stayed cool in July and above freezing in January, holding steady between 32 and 40 degrees with nothing but packed earth, stone walls, and the thermal mass of the ground itself. Potatoes lasted 5 months. Apples kept their crunch through December. Carrots buried in damp sand stayed firm until spring. The Amish understood something that food scientists have since confirmed: that temperature, humidity, and darkness slow the enzymatic reactions that cause produce to rot, and that a well-built cellar replicates the conditions of commercial cold storage at zero operating cost. No compressor, no thermostat, just the earth doing what the earth does. You learned which shelf stayed coldest and which corner held the most humidity. You checked the apples by smell. If one was turning, you found it before it spoiled the rest. The tractor was faster, everyone knew that. But the Amish kept their horses, Belgians and Percherons, heavy and patient, pulling single-bottom plows through fields at a pace that looked like stubbornness and turned out to be soil science. A 2,000-pound tractor compresses earth into hardpan, a dense, airless layer below the surface that roots can't penetrate and water can't drain through. Soil compaction reduces crop yields by up to 30% and takes years to reverse. A horse exerts a fraction of that pressure, spread across 4 hooves, and the shallow plow it pulls turns the top layer without destroying the structure underneath. Researchers at the University of Kentucky found that horse-worked fields retained significantly more organic matter and supported more earthworm activity than machine-tilled plots on comparable acreage. The Amish didn't cite the data. They just noticed their soil stayed dark and loose while the neighbors' fields turned gray and hard. Corn one year, oats the next, clover the third, then back to corn. The pattern moved across the fields like a slow wheel. The same rotation European farmers brought to Pennsylvania in the 1700s preserved almost unchanged in Amish practice while industrial agriculture went all in on monoculture. The clover year was the key. As a legume, clover pulls nitrogen from the air and fixes it into the soil through root nodule bacteria, replenishing exactly what corn and oats strip out. South Dakota State University research confirmed that a 3-year rotation with a legume phase maintains soil fertility without synthetic nitrogen and reduces pest cycles by breaking the habitat continuity that insects depend on. The field stayed productive without a single bag of commercial fertilizer crossing the property line. Nothing left that kitchen without a second use. Potato peels, carrot tops, onion skins, eggshells, coffee grounds, apple cores, everything organic went into the compost pile behind the garden, layered with straw, manure, and leaves, turned with a pitchfork every few weeks until it broke down into something dark, crumbly, and rich with the smell of wet forest floor. The Amish were composting centuries before municipalities started curbside green bin programs, and the science behind it is now taught in every agricultural extension course in the country. Thermophilic bacteria inside a well-managed pile can reach 140 degrees, hot enough to kill weed seeds and pathogens while converting waste into humus that improves soil structure, moisture retention, and nutrient availability. Ohio State University research found that compost-amended plots yielded 20% more produce than chemically fertilized controls over a 5-year period. The Amish already knew. Their gardens told them every season. When a young couple needed a barn, the whole church district showed up. 50, 70, sometimes 100 people arriving before dawn with tools, food, and a shared understanding that the building would be finished by sundown. No contracts, no invoices, just a community that remembered who helped last time and who would need help next. Psychologists studying social cohesion now call this generalized reciprocity, the practice of giving without immediate expectation of return, which builds trust networks more durable than any formal institution. The quilting bee operated on the same principle, women gathering around a frame in someone's living room, stitching and talking for hours, producing both a blanket and a bond that modern research links to lower rates of anxiety and depression. These weren't social events dressed up as labor. They were labor that happened to build the deepest kind of community, the kind you could lean on when the barn was yours. Every autumn, the women saved seeds, not from a catalog, not from a plastic packet with a barcode, but from the best plants in the garden. The tomato that ripened earliest, the bean that produced the longest, the pepper that handled the frost. Those seeds went into labeled envelopes and stored in a cool, dry place until spring. It was selective breeding at the kitchen table, practiced with the patience of someone who expected to feed the same family from the same soil for 50 years. Modern agriculture moved the opposite direction, toward patented hybrids that produce one harvest and lose vigor, forcing farmers to buy new stock every season. The Amish kept their heirloom lines intact. Geneticists now recognize that diversity in seed stock is the most important buffer against crop failure. Those envelope seeds were insurance written in biology. Some Amish households didn't even need a root cellar. If a cold stream ran near the property, they channeled a line of that water underneath the house or through a stone-lined trough in the basement, running water that stayed around 50 degrees year-round, cold enough to keep milk, butter, and eggs fresh for days without ice or machinery. The containers sat half-submerged in the current, and the constant flow carried away heat the way a breeze cools wet skin. It was passive refrigeration, designed by people who never used the term. Engineers now study these systems as examples of geothermal cooling, the same principle behind modern ground-source heat pumps that cost thousands to install. The Amish version cost nothing but a shovel and a few flat stones. You checked the butter by pressing a finger to the surface. If it gave slightly but didn't melt, the temperature was right. If it went soft, you moved the crock deeper into the current. No thermometer required. The corn went in first, tall and straight, reaching for the sun. Then the beans, their vines spiraling up the stalks like living twine. Then the squash, its broad leaves spreading across the ground to shade out weeds and hold moisture in the soil. The Amish didn't invent this arrangement. Indigenous peoples across North America had been planting these three sisters for thousands of years, but Amish families adopted and preserved it when industrial agriculture abandoned companion planting entirely. The science behind it is elegant. Beans fix atmospheric nitrogen into the soil through symbiotic root bacteria, feeding the corn that would otherwise strip it bare. Squash leaves create a living mulch that reduces evaporation by up to 70%. And the corn provides the vertical structure that eliminates the need for trellises or stakes. 3 crops in one bed, each one giving what the others lack. No fertilizer, no herbicide, just a planting pattern older than the plow, still producing abundantly in gardens where somebody remembered to use it. If the 3 sisters kept the garden alive without chemicals, the clothesline kept the laundry clean without a single kilowatt. And science says it did it better than the dryer ever could. Sheets snapping in the wind on a Monday morning, pinned tight at the corners, bleaching white under direct sunlight, while the UV rays killed bacteria that a hot tumble cycle only stunned. Amish women hung everything, dresses, trousers, quilts, dish towels, on lines that stretched from the porch post to a pole near the barn. The fabric lasted longer without the heat damage that shortens fibers in machine dryers. Colors held, seams stayed tight, and there was a smell to sun-dried cotton that no dryer sheet has ever replicated, something clean and sharp, like the air itself had done the work. The lines are mostly gone now. The porches got enclosed, the yards got smaller. But if you grew up taking those sheets down at dusk, folding them still warm from the afternoon, you remember? Nobody had to tell you what clean smelled like. Leave it to the Amish to look at a pot of leftover potato water and see vinegar. After boiling potatoes for supper, the starchy liquid got saved, sweetened with a little sugar, and seeded with raw apple peels or a splash from the last batch. Then it sat. Weeks later, wild yeast and Acetobacter bacteria had done what no factory could match, turning kitchen waste into a sharp, tangy vinegar, good enough for pickling, salad dressing, and scrubbing the countertops. The process was the same fermentation science behind commercial vinegar production, just slower, quieter, and powered by nothing but room temperature and patience. Nobody in the household would have called it a bioreactor. They called it the jug on the shelf, and if it smelled too strong, it wasn't ruined. It was ready. The modern homesteading movement has rediscovered this trick and treats it like a revelation. The Amish never stopped doing it. They just never thought it was worth mentioning. Every morning after breakfast, the eggshells went into a bowl by the sink, not the trash. When the bowl was full, the shells got crushed by hand and scattered around the base of the tomato plants and pepper rows. It looked like superstition. It was calcium delivery. Eggshells are roughly 95% calcium carbonate, the same compound sold as garden lime at the farm supply store. As they break down in soil, they release calcium slowly, preventing the blossom end rot that turns the bottom of a good tomato black and hollow. The jagged edges served a second purpose. Slugs won't cross crushed shell. The sharp fragments cut into their soft bodies, and they turn back. Two problems solved with garbage. If your grandmother saved eggshells in a coffee can on the counter, she wasn't being quirky. She was protecting the harvest. In January, when the ponds froze thick enough to hold a team of horses, the whole community turned out with handsaws and iron tongs. They cut the ice into blocks. Heavy, blue-white slabs pulled from the water and loaded onto sleds, then stacked inside insulated ice houses packed with sawdust and straw. That ice lasted through August if you kept the door shut and opened it quick. It chilled the milk, preserved the meat, and kept the butter from going soft in the summer kitchen. The thermodynamics were simple. Sawdust is a natural insulator with an R value high enough to slow heat transfer for months. The social physics were just as important. Ice harvesting was a community event, families working side by side in the bitter cold, kids sliding on the cleared surface while the men hauled blocks. It was hard, freezing, exhausting work, and people looked forward to it all year. Those ice parties stopped when electric freezers arrived. The ponds are still there. The saws are rusting in somebody's barn. She started it after supper and let it go all night. Chicken carcasses, beef knuckles, a splash of vinegar to pull the minerals from the bone, water just below a simmer so it never went cloudy. By morning, the kitchen smelled like something between a restaurant and a church, rich and deep and impossible to ignore. When it cooled, the broth set into a jelly so thick you could turn the jar upside down. That wobble was collagen, the same protein that modern wellness brands extract, dehydrate, and sell as powder for $25 a canister. Amish women had been simmering it out of bones for generations, spooning it into soups, using it to braise tough cuts of meat until they fell apart. Glycine, proline, glutamine, amino acids that support joint health and gut lining, all of it pulled from scraps the rest of the world was throwing in the trash. The recipe was always the same: bones, water, time, and hands that knew when it was done without ever lifting the lid. If that broth built the body from the inside, the daily work built it from the outside. Though nobody in an Amish household would have called it exercise, they called it Monday. Researchers at the University of Tennessee tracked physical activity levels in an old-order Amish community and found that men averaged over 18,000 steps a day, and women over 14,000, numbers that make the modern 10,000-step goal look like a warm-up. Obesity rates among the Amish were a fraction of the national average, not because they dieted, because they plowed, lifted, hauled, walked to the neighbor's house instead of driving, carried water instead of turning a faucet, and spent more hours on their feet in a single morning than most Americans spend in a week. The body didn't need a gym membership. It needed a reason to move, and the farm gave it 100 reasons before noon. You ate what the garden gave you when the garden gave it to you. Strawberries in June, sweet corn in August, squash and root vegetables through the winter. There was no flying in tomatoes from Chile in February, no warehouse raspberries wrapped in plastic clamshells. What was ripe was supper, and what wasn't ripe yet was something to wait for. Nutritional science now confirms what Amish households practiced by default. Produce harvested at peak ripeness and eaten within hours contains significantly higher concentrations of vitamins, antioxidants, and flavor compounds than anything shipped across a continent in a refrigerated truck. The Amish were eating farm to table before the phrase existed, before it became a restaurant concept with a markup. They just called it eating. And the anticipation, that first July tomato sliced thick on a plate, still warm from the vine, salted and eaten standing up in the kitchen, was half the pleasure. You can't buy that at a grocery store. You can't even describe it to someone who's never had it. The skillet weighed 10 pounds and had been in the family longer than anyone alive could remember. Black as midnight, slick as glass from decades of seasoning. Layers of animal fat baked into the iron until the surface became its own non-stick coating, better than anything a factory could spray on and guaranteed to outlast it by a century. Amish kitchens ran on cast iron. Cornbread went in hot. Eggs slid across without sticking. Pork chops seared in a way that thin aluminum couldn't touch. And every meal cooked in that pan leached a small amount of dietary iron into the food, a benefit that nutritional researchers have documented as particularly significant for women and children in communities where supplements weren't available. You never washed it with soap. You scraped it with salt, wiped it with lard, and put it back on the stove. That was the rule, passed from mother to daughter without discussion. The pan your grandmother seasoned is the one your granddaughter should be cooking on. If nobody kept it, nobody will. The summer kitchen ran hot from June through September. Kettles of boiling water on the stove, jars lined up on towels, lids and rings soaking in a pot of their own. Water bath canning for the high-acid foods, tomatoes, pickles, peaches, jams. Pressure canning for everything else, green beans, corn, beef, chicken stock, where the temperature had to reach 240 degrees to kill Clostridium botulinum spores that no amount of boiling water could touch. They knew which foods needed pressure and which didn't, knew the headspace to leave in each jar, knew the sound of a lid sealing, that sharp metallic pop that meant the vacuum had formed and the contents would hold for years on a cellar shelf without a single chemical preservative. A family could put up 400 jars in a season, all of it sealed by heat and patience. At the end of the lane where the gravel met the road stood a small wooden shed with a phone inside, shared by 4 or 5 families, used only when necessary. No voicemail, no caller ID, no notifications pulling your attention sideways every 90 seconds. The Amish didn't ban the telephone because they feared it. They moved it out of the house because they understood what it would do to the kitchen table if it stayed. Modern research has caught up with that instinct. Studies on smartphone use now link constant connectivity to increased anxiety, disrupted sleep, shortened attention spans, and weakened face-to-face relationships. Exactly the damage the Amish predicted a century before the data existed. The phone shanty was a compromise, not a rejection. You could make a call when you needed to. You just had to walk to it, and that walk was the point. It made you decide whether the call mattered enough to leave the house. Most of the time, it didn't. If the phone shanty kept the noise out, the milk pail brought the nourishment in. Straight from the cow, still warm, unpasteurized, unprocessed, poured through a cloth strainer and into glass jars that went directly to the cold stream or the cellar. Amish families drank raw milk the way their ancestors had for centuries, and European studies published in the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology found that early exposure to unprocessed farm milk was associated with significantly lower rates of asthma and allergic sensitization in children. The milk also went into fermented forms: yogurt cultured on the back of the wood stove, soft cheese pressed in cloth, buttermilk saved from the churn. Each one carried live cultures that modern probiotic companies spend millions trying to replicate in capsule form. You drank it because it was there, because it was fresh, because the cow was yours. Nobody called it a microbiome intervention. The light in an Amish kitchen at night was amber and low. Kerosene flame behind glass, throwing soft shadows across the walls while the family sat around the table reading, mending, talking. No overhead fluorescent, no screen casting blue wavelengths into the eyes at 10 o'clock. Researchers studying circadian disruption now know that blue light from phones, tablets, and LED bulbs suppresses melatonin production and delays sleep onset. Exactly the mechanism that the Amish avoided by default. Their evenings wound down in warm spectrum light that told the brain it was nighttime, the way firelight had done for thousands of years before Edison. The kerosene lamp didn't just illuminate the room, it protected the rhythm underneath, the ancient cycle of cortisol and melatonin that governs mood, metabolism, and immune function. When the lamp went out, the house went dark. And in that darkness, every body in the household fell into the kind of sleep that most Americans haven't experienced since the last night they spent without a charger on the nightstand. When a couple got old enough that the farm work slowed them down, they didn't move to a facility with fluorescent halls and a television bolted to the wall. They moved into the Dottie house, a small addition built onto the main farmhouse, close enough to hear the grandchildren through the wall, close enough to smell supper cooking on the other side of the door. The family didn't outsource their elders, they kept them. Studies on aging show that older adults living with family report lower rates of depression, better cognitive function, and longer lifespans than those in isolated settings. The Dottie house wasn't a burden. It was architecture designed around the belief that the people who built this life deserved to stay in it. When the chair in that kitchen finally went empty, the loss was felt through every wall. An Amish child learned to cook by standing on a stool next to the stove, learned to garden by pulling weeds before knowing their names, learned to build by handing tools to a father who explained nothing and demonstrated everything. Formal schooling ended at 8th grade, but the education never stopped. It just moved from the classroom to the kitchen, the barn, the workshop, the field. Modern research on kinesthetic learning confirms that children retain more when they learn through physical action than through reading or listening alone. The Amish knew this without the study. They also knew what screen time was doing to attention spans decades before pediatricians started issuing warnings. Their kids didn't have devices to limit. They had chores to finish, animals to feed, bread to shape with their hands before it went into the oven. And the thing those children carried into adulthood wasn't just a skill set. It was the memory of the person who stood beside them while they learned it. In the Amish community near Bern, Indiana, something was different, and it took Northwestern University scientists nearly 30 years to figure out what. A rare mutation in the SERPINE1 gene, carried by about a quarter of this particular kindred, resulted in unusually low levels of a protein called PAI1. The carriers lived to 85 on average, a full decade longer than relatives without the mutation. Their telomeres were 10% longer. Their fasting insulin was 30% lower, and not a single carrier had developed diabetes. The study, published in Science Advances in 2017, identified the first genetic mutation in humans shown to protect against multiple markers of biological aging simultaneously. The Amish in Bern didn't know they were carrying a medical breakthrough in their blood. They just kept living the way they always had, and outlived almost everyone around them. Twice a year, every member of the community sat together and reviewed the Ordnung, the unwritten code that governed what technology could enter their lives and what had to stay outside the door. It wasn't ignorance. It was the most deliberate technology assessment process in America. Every new tool got the same question. Will this bring us closer together or pull us apart? If the answer was uncertain, they waited. If the answer was clear, they acted, sometimes adopting, sometimes refusing, always as a group. Cal Newport and other scholars of digital minimalism now point to the Amish as the original practitioners of intentional technology use. People who evaluated every innovation not by its convenience but by its cost to the things they valued most. Family, presence, quiet, the ability to sit across from someone and give them your whole attention. The world called them stubborn. The science called them prescient. And the kitchens they protected, warm, slow, full of hands and voices, are the ones we're all trying to get back to now. Mincemeat pies were once the jewel of a table. But when meat ran out, when fruit spoiled, and when sugar was hard to come by, people turned to what was still left in the garden: green tomatoes. Tart, firm, and stubbornly unripe, these were peeled, chopped, and cooked down with vinegar, cinnamon, and raisins if you had them. The result was a pie filling that tasted oddly familiar but haunting in its own way. It did not pretend to be meat. It just reminded you that flavor could come from the most unexpected places. Amish cooks passed this one down quietly, almost protectively, like a secret too strange to share with the outside world. The mixture was sticky, dark, and spiced, preserved in jars and spooned into pies that looked like any other from the outside. And that was the point: to look normal, to feel normal. In a world where nothing was, these pies were a trick of the heart. You could feed a whole family on green tomatoes and no one would feel cheated. When you think of Amish cooking, few dishes embody their spirit of resourcefulness quite like chicken corn soup. This hearty, comforting recipe emerged from a practical need to make the most of every ingredient. In Pennsylvania Dutch tradition, nothing from the farm went to waste. Leftover chicken, fresh corn from summer fields, and even homemade egg noodles found their way into this one-pot wonder, making it a staple at gatherings and harvest celebrations. The ingredients are as unpretentious as they are nourishing: shredded chicken, corn kernels, chicken broth, onions, and sometimes diced potatoes. But the secret to its unique texture lies in rivels, tiny dumplings made by combining flour and egg. This was a brilliant way to stretch the soup and make it heartier, feeding more people with less. From a health perspective, it's a winner. Packed with protein from the chicken, fiber from the corn, and wholesome carbohydrates from the rivels, it's a balanced meal in a bowl. Plus, it's incredibly versatile. Swap in canned corn during winter months or add leftover veggies for a customized twist. Frugal and filling, this soup exemplifies Amish practicality. Pickled red beets and eggs brought color and tang to even the plainest tables, their ruby hue shining through glass jars on pantry shelves. The process began with beets simmered in vinegar, sugar, and warm spices like cloves or allspice until tender and fragrant. Hard-boiled eggs were peeled and dropped into the hot brine, soaking up its jewel-toned color day by day. By the third day, the eggs had turned a deep pink, the whites glowing like stained glass, and the flavor had deepened to a perfect balance of sweet and sour. They were served beside stews, sandwiches, or slices of fresh bread, each bite adding brightness to the meal. The beets themselves were sweet and earthy, their tang waking up tired winter palates. This was food made to last, stretching freshness into months of color and flavor. Every Amish kitchen had a jar waiting on the shelf, a cheerful reminder that beauty could be bottled from thrift. Pickled red beets and eggs were more than a side dish. They were an act of artful survival, joy preserved through patience and care. You think you know apple pie. You think of flaky crusts, cinnamon steam, and golden slices melting on your tongue. But this pie came from a different world. It started with dried apples, shriveled and leathery, boiled back to life in a pot of water like something rising from the past. There was no butter-laced filling, no luxury in the crust, just shortening, flour, and cold water. Sometimes brown sugar was added if you were lucky, but even that was a stretch. The result was a pie that tasted faintly of sweetness, faintly of spice, but mostly of memory. Amish families had no room for waste. When apples ripened, they were sliced thin and strung up to dry on thread across kitchens and porches. Months later, those slices were rehydrated, spiced, and baked into pies that reminded people what abundance used to taste like. This pie did not flake or sparkle. It did not melt in your mouth. But it filled your belly and gave you the sense that, just maybe, things would be all right. In Amish cooking, simplicity meets indulgence in unexpected ways, and few desserts exemplify that better than peanut butter pie. This creamy treat is rooted in practicality, using common pantry staples to create something extraordinary. Peanut butter, often seen as a humble spread, takes center stage here, offering rich flavor without the need for costly ingredients. The ingredients are minimal: creamy peanut butter, cream cheese, powdered sugar, and whipped topping, all nestled in a graham cracker crust. There's no baking involved, just mixing, chilling, and enjoying. The end result is a pie that's decadently rich but surprisingly easy to make, ideal for any occasion that calls for dessert without hours in the kitchen. Versatility is key with this pie. Dress it up with chocolate shavings, chopped nuts, or even a drizzle of caramel if you're feeling fancy. And from a cost perspective, it's a winner. No exotic ingredients required, just things you likely have on hand. For a dessert, it holds a few hidden benefits. Peanut butter is a decent source of protein and healthy fats, and the pie itself is lower in sugar than many other sweet treats. Egg noodles from scratch were the soul of Amish cooking. Humble, handmade, and endlessly useful. Just eggs, flour, and salt were kneaded into a firm dough, rolled out thin and cut with care. The strands dried on wooden racks or towel-lined tables, catching sunlight from kitchen windows. They boiled quickly, filling the room with the scent of simplicity. Served with butter, gravy, or tossed into soups, they were as dependable as they were delicious. Making noodles by hand was a lesson in patience and pride. Every roll, every cut a quiet prayer for nourishment. No machines, no shortcuts, just steady work and faith in the result. Egg noodles were not just food. They were tradition, spun by hand and shared with love. You would not think a meatloaf could carry so much weight, but this one did. Poor man's steak was more than a frugal dish. It was a declaration of survival, a subtle act of rebellion against hard times. Amish families knew how to stretch a dollar, and this hearty alternative to real steak was living proof. Ground beef, flattened into thick, squared patties, breaded with crushed saltine crackers and fried until the edges curled like an old quilt, then simmered in a pan gravy so rich it nearly lied. It was filling, it was warm, and it could fool a hungry stomach into thinking it had eaten something grand. People poured it over mashed potatoes, spooned it next to corn, or just ate it on its own when nothing else was left. In an age when dinner had to be both cheap and comforting, this dish managed to be both. The name may sound humble, but this was luxury wrapped in a lie, told to children so they would sleep full and smiling. Today, we see recipes like this and forget the story behind them. But every crackle of a fried crust reminds you, it was never about steak. It was about getting by with grace. In Amish kitchens, nothing goes to waste, and even the humblest ingredients can shine. Take pickled red beets and eggs, a dish that marries practicality with a stunning pop of color. This tradition traces back to the Pennsylvania Dutch, where pickling was essential for preserving food through long winters. The process is as straightforward as it is ingenious. Beets are boiled, sliced, and combined with vinegar, sugar, water, and spices like cloves and cinnamon. Hard-boiled eggs are added to the jar, and over a few days, they soak up the vibrant beet color, turning a deep, jewel-toned magenta. The result is as striking on the plate as it is on the palate, with a sweet, sour, and slightly earthy flavor. Beyond their beauty, this dish is a masterclass in resourcefulness. Beets are inexpensive, and combining them with eggs, one of the most affordable sources of protein, creates a dish that's as economical as it is versatile. Serve it as a snack, a salad topping, or even a conversation starter at your next potluck. Health-wise, beets pack antioxidants, while eggs provide protein and essential vitamins. It's a dish that's good for the eyes, the stomach, and maybe even the soul. Fried cornmeal mush was the meal that never failed, whether for breakfast or supper. Yesterday's cornmeal porridge was poured into pans, chilled, and sliced thick before hitting the skillet. The butter hissed as each piece browned to a golden crust, the inside soft and creamy as pudding. It was the kind of food that tasted better the second time around, sweetened with syrup or served beside fried eggs. For the Amish, it was a dish of virtue, simple, frugal, and satisfying. It made the most of what you had and wasted nothing. Each bite tasted like comfort, like home after a long day. Fried cornmeal mush was proof that even the plainest food could be a masterpiece in the right hands. It sounds like a joke. It sounds like a mistake. But water pie was neither. It was a marvel. A Depression-era dessert that required no milk, no butter, no eggs, just water, sugar, flour, and maybe a dab of vanilla or a spoon of butter if you had it. The filling came together as a pale, trembling custard. Sweet, subtle, and almost unreal. Amish women made this when the pantry was empty and the world was colder than it should be. You poured water into a pie crust, stirred in flour and sugar, and baked it until magic happened. It firmed up into something between pudding and pie, something you could slice, serve, and call dessert. There was no texture like it. There still is not. You could not taste luxury in it, but you could taste defiance. This pie said, "I will make sweetness out of nothing." We have lost the art of resourceful comfort, but water pie remembers. Some say the origin of whoopie pies is a matter of debate, but one thing is clear. Their connection to Amish kitchens is unmistakable. Legend has it that Amish farmers and school children would find these sweet treats tucked into their lunch pails and exclaim, "Whoopie!" Whether that story is fact or folklore, it's hard not to feel the same joy when biting into one of these delightful desserts. At its core, a whoopie pie is two soft, cake-like cookies, typically chocolate, sandwiched around a creamy filling. The classic version features a marshmallow-based filling, though variations include cream cheese or buttercream. The ingredients are simple and accessible: flour, cocoa, sugar, eggs, butter, and vanilla, along with pantry staples for the filling. These were items Amish households often had on hand, making this dessert as practical as it is indulgent. Versatility is where whoopie pies shine. They can be flavored with pumpkin, red velvet, or even peanut butter for a twist on tradition. They're also easy to make in batches, perfect for sharing at community gatherings or packing into lunchboxes. Ham and bean soup was the meal that carried families through long winters, slow-cooked on wood stoves that warmed both hands and hearts. A single ham bone saved from Sunday dinner was enough to flavor a whole pot of white beans, onions, and carrots. Sometimes celery or garlic found its way in, if the garden had any left to give. The beans simmered for hours until soft, thickening the broth naturally, while the meat fell from the bone in tender shreds. The smell filled every room, a mix of smoke, salt, and comfort that promised fullness. It was eaten with bread or cornbread, ladled into deep bowls that steamed in the cold air. Leftovers were even better the next day, richer and heartier after sitting overnight. For the Amish, this soup was more than a recipe. It was a rhythm of life. It spoke of thrift, patience, and gratitude for every bit of nourishment the earth and table provided. Ham and bean soup reminded everyone that love could be boiled down, shared, and still keep giving. Breakfasts were different back then. You did not scroll a phone or sip a $6 latte. You stood over the stove flipping slabs of fried cornmeal mush until the kitchen smelled like waking up on the right side of the world. Amish homes made this by instinct. Cold, leftover mush from yesterday's pot, cut into thick rectangles, pan-fried in lard or butter until golden and crispy on the outside, creamy on the inside. It came alive with maple syrup or sometimes sorghum if that was all you had. This was the food of farmers, of children with frost in their hair and dirt on their shoes, of women in aprons who measured nothing but got it right anyway. The mush started as a simple boiling of cornmeal and buttermilk, whisked until it thickened and poured into pans to cool overnight. The next morning you sliced it like bread and gave it a second life. And that is what it was, really. A second life for leftovers, a second life for mornings that felt like they would never end. In a world that forgets what it means to make do, this dish still whispers a lesson. You do not need much to make something good. You just need to care. In Amish homes, chicken and noodles was original comfort food, blending simple ingredients with a legacy of practicality. Historically, this meal was a way to make the most of farm staples. When a chicken was butchered, no part went to waste, and homemade egg noodles stretched the dish to serve a crowd. The recipe revolves around basic ingredients: shredded chicken, homemade egg noodles, chicken broth, and a touch of cream or butter for richness. The egg noodles are the star of the show. made with just flour and eggs, hand-rolled and cut with care. Once combined with a savory broth, they create a thick, hearty dish that's almost stew-like in texture. Versatility is where this recipe shines. Add carrots, celery, or peas for extra nutrition, or swap the chicken for turkey after a holiday meal. Leftovers are easily reheated, making it as practical as it is delicious. Health-wise, this dish is well-balanced. Lean protein from the chicken, carbohydrates from the noodles, and an option to sneak in vegetables. Economical, satisfying, and steeped in tradition, Amish chicken and noodles is a reminder that simple food can be simply extraordinary. There is nothing appetizing about the word sour, especially when it comes to breakfast. But back then, when milk went past its prime, you did not pour it down the drain. You made pancakes, thick, golden, soft in the middle, with edges that crisped like lace in a hot cast-iron skillet. These were not just pancakes, these were proof that waste was a luxury no one could afford. Amish cooks knew sour milk still had value. It brought tang, lift, and tenderness to whatever it touched. Mixed with flour, eggs, and baking soda, it transformed a nearly spoiled liquid into something warm and good. You could smell them across the yard, especially when maple syrup hit the hot griddle. They were often eaten plain or with butter scraped from a homemade churn. But even dry, they did the job, and the job was simple. Keep the family fed, stretch what you had, and find joy in what was nearly thrown away. It takes a kind of quiet brilliance to make something beautiful out of something spoiled. In a world before social media, recipes traveled the old-fashioned way, through hands, homes, and shared traditions. Amish friendship bread is a prime example of this, not just a recipe, but a tradition steeped in connection. Its roots lie in the idea of a sourdough starter, passed from person to person, with each batch carrying a little piece of the past. It was a gesture of kindness, a way to nurture relationships in the simplest, most delicious way. The recipe starts with the starter itself, a mix of flour, sugar, milk, and yeast that ferments over time. Once you're handed a starter, you feed it for 10 days like a culinary pet before using part of it to bake. The remaining starter was passed along to friends and neighbors, spreading not just bread, but community. The bread itself is a sweet, spiced loaf, often flavored with cinnamon and sometimes with add-ins like nuts or chocolate chips. Economically, it's brilliant, using pantry staples to create a treat that's easily shared or stored. And health-wise, the fermentation process adds a slight probiotic benefit, while the loaf's wholesome ingredients make it a real sugary indulgence. A single starter can yield endless variations, ensuring that no two loaves or friendships are exactly the same. Poor man's steak was the working family's answer to Sunday dinner when real steak was out of reach. Ground beef or leftover scraps were shaped into patties, seasoned simply, and baked in a rich homemade gravy until tender. The edges browned beautifully, the gravy thickened to silk, and the smell filled the whole house. Served with mashed potatoes or buttered noodles, it was hearty enough to fool anyone into thinking it was a feast. The secret was slow cooking and care, two things that cost nothing but made everything better. Each bite carried the taste of home, of making do and making it good. Poor man's steak wasn't about imitation, it was about pride. It proved that with time, patience, and love, even the humblest meal could taste like abundance. There is something about the smell of butter browning in a pan that makes the whole house feel like a prayer. This was not a flashy dish. No sauce, no cheese, no garnish. Just egg noodles, boiled and tossed with browned butter and a pinch of salt. It was what you made when you had nothing, but you wanted dinner to still feel like something. Amish mothers would stir the butter over low heat until it turned golden and nutty, the scent rising like Sunday hymns. The noodles were always homemade, rolled thin on worn counters and cut with care. This dish was usually served as a side, but sometimes, when the pantry was bare, it stood proudly on its own. You would sit down, fork in hand, and suddenly the world was quiet. Warmth, salt, a bite of softness in the middle of a hard week. This recipe was not about impressing anyone. It was about reminding people they were still cared for. In the 18th century, Pennsylvania Dutch settlers brought with them a culinary tradition that turned flour and sugar into a carnival-worthy creation. While funnel cakes are often associated with fairgrounds today, their roots are firmly planted in Amish and Mennonite communities. Originally known as dripping cake, these crispy, golden treats were a testament to the art of turning simple ingredients into something spectacular. The batter itself is straightforward: flour, eggs, milk, sugar, and a pinch of baking powder. The magic happens when it's poured through a funnel into hot oil, creating delicate, lacy designs that are as pleasing to the eye as they are to the palate. A dusting of powdered sugar finishes the masterpiece, though modern variations might add cinnamon or fruit toppings. Funnel cakes required minimal ingredients and no fancy equipment, making them accessible to families with limited means. Leftover batter could be saved for another day, stretching resources even further. Health benefits might not be the first thing you associate with fried dough, but there's no harm in a little indulgence now and then. And if you're making them at home, you control the oil, portion size, and toppings. Amish friendship bread was more than just bread. It was a bond, a passing of kindness from one home to another. It started with a simple starter, a bubbling mix of flour, sugar, and milk that was fed and shared over time. When a neighbor handed you a jar of starter, they were giving more than dough, they were offering connection. Every loaf baked from it carried the warmth of community, its scent filling kitchens with cinnamon, vanilla, and comfort. It stretched through generations, each recipe a little different, but equally filled with care. You could taste the patience, the faith, and the friendship in every slice. It was never about perfection. It was about people, about sharing abundance even when there was little to spare. In that way, friendship bread was not just a recipe. It was a legacy of generosity, one rising loaf at a time. In the heart of Amish country, dessert is more than a treat. It's a reminder of life's simpler joys. Apple dumplings, a baked delight that dates back to early settlers, capture that spirit perfectly. These individually wrapped apples were born out of a culture that prioritized resourcefulness. With apples being plentiful in Pennsylvania orchards, turning them into dumplings was a way to stretch seasonal produce into something extraordinary. The process begins with basic ingredients: peeled and cored apples, pie dough, brown sugar, cinnamon, and butter. The apples are wrapped snugly in pastry, baked in a rich cinnamon syrup, and emerge golden and aromatic. The result is a dessert that looks like it belongs on the cover of a country cookbook and tastes even better. And if you're feeling adventurous, try swapping apples for pears or experimenting with fillings like raisins or walnuts. From a practical standpoint, this dessert is frugal in every sense. Leftover dough or bruised apples, perfect for dumplings. And let's not forget, apples bring fiber, antioxidants, and a dose of vitamin C to the table. It's dessert that works harder than it has to. Paired with a scoop of vanilla ice cream, it's indulgence wrapped in tradition. Shoe-fly pie was the sweetheart of the Amish kitchen, proof that even the simplest pantry could create something extraordinary. Made from nothing more than molasses, flour, sugar, and hot water, this pie was rich in flavor but humble in origin. The crust was rolled by hand, filled with a sticky, sweet syrup that bubbled up through the crumb topping as it baked. The smell alone, warm molasses, toasted sugar, and butter, was enough to draw every child to the table before it even cooled. It was born in lean times when every ingredient mattered and nothing could be wasted. The pie was both dessert and memory, a reflection of life itself, plain, honest, and deeply satisfying. Served with coffee in the morning or cream after supper, it represented comfort that money could not buy. Shoe-fly pie was more than sweetness. It was a reminder that resourcefulness could taste like luxury when made with love. Most people have heard of shoe-fly pie, but few remember its fluffier, quieter sibling, the shoe-fly cake. This was the kind of dessert you found on a counter at your grandmother's house, covered with a faded linen towel and dusted with molasses crumbs. Unlike the sticky pie, shoe-fly cake was lighter, baked in a sheet pan, and sliced into neat brown squares that stuck to your fingers in all the best ways. It was made for Sundays, for unexpected guests, for potlucks and funerals, and sometimes just because someone was craving something sweet in the middle of a week that had gone sour. Amish kitchens had their rhythm, and choufle cake was one of those steady beats. The magic was in its use of basic staples: molasses, flour, baking soda, and hot water. No frosting, no fruit, no filling. Just a dense, caramel-flavored bite that told you sugar was a gift and not a guarantee. It came from frugality, from scraping the barrel and still baking something worth remembering. Rivel soup was the kind of meal that came from nothing and somehow became everything. A pot of chicken broth simmered slow while hands worked flour and egg into tiny, irregular dough crumbs called rivels. These humble bits were dropped into the bubbling broth, puffing up into soft, chewy morsels that turned simple broth into something hearty and complete. Sometimes leftover vegetables, carrots, celery, or onions, were stirred in for extra depth, but the rivels always stole the spotlight. The steam rose gently from the pot, carrying the scent of home and hope. It was food for long winters and weary bodies, the kind that filled more than just the stomach. No two batches were ever exactly the same, but that was the charm. Each bowl told its own story of improvisation and care. For the Amish, rivel soup represented the art of making do and doing it well, the quiet pride of turning scarcity into satisfaction. It was humble food that asked for little and gave much, a bowl full of comfort born from the simplest of hands. Snits and knep was not a dish you stumbled into. It was a dish passed down in quiet voices and heavy iron pots. Dried apple slices, known as snits, simmered with chunks of smoked ham in a sweet, salty bath that filled every room with the scent of a time before shortcuts. Then came the knep, doughy dumplings that puffed and floated, tender and absorbing. It was a collision of pantry and pasture, preserved fruit and salted meat tied together with soft flour clouds that tasted like your grandmother's hands. This was not just dinner. This was a moment, a slow-cooked reward after a week of hard labor, a gathering meal meant to stretch, to soothe, to hold. Amish families knew how to work with time. They let the apples soak, let the ham infuse, and dropped the dumplings in only when everything was ready. There was no rush. There was only rhythm. It came out in one pot, served with ladles and silence, and by the end, there was nothing left but the memory of warmth. Corn fritters were the taste of late summer joy, a golden mix of sweetness and savor born straight from the garden. Kernels were cut fresh from the cob, their milk thick and sweet, then stirred into a batter of flour, eggs, and a touch of sugar. The mixture was dropped into hot oil or butter, frying until crisp at the edges and tender within. The scent filled the kitchen with warmth and nostalgia, the sound of sizzling a melody of home. Eaten plain, dusted with sugar, or drizzled with syrup, they were loved by both children and grown folk alike. For the Amish, fritters were a celebration of harvest, a way to honor the land's bounty while wasting nothing. Whether served at breakfast or as a side for supper, they brought sunshine to every plate. In each bite was the taste of simplicity perfected, proof that happiness could be fried up from what grew just outside the door. Macaroni salad has become a mayonnaise-drenched cliché at modern gatherings. But the Amish version? It was different. It was better. This was macaroni custard salad, a tangy, creamy miracle that walked the line between savory and sweet without ever stumbling. Elbow macaroni cooked just past al dente, folded into a custard made from eggs, vinegar, sugar, and a touch of dry mustard. It sounds odd until you taste it. Then it makes perfect sense. The eggs turned the dressing into a rich, silky coating. The vinegar cut through the sweetness just enough to make your mouth water. And the macaroni? It held onto every drop like it knew how rare flavor used to be. This salad was not a side. It was a main event. Served cold, sometimes studded with pickles or celery, it landed on every church table and picnic bench with quiet pride. It came from a world where food had to last, where dishes were made with intention and passed around in chipped glass bowls. Amish cabbage casserole was the food of quiet evenings, hearty, wholesome, and meant to fill more than just hunger. Layers of chopped cabbage, rice, and ground beef came together under a creamy sauce made from milk, butter, and flour, baked until tender and bubbling. The cabbage softened to sweetness, the rice absorbed every bit of savory richness, and the beef gave it substance. The smell drifted through the home, cozy and familiar, wrapping around every room like a blanket. Sometimes cheese was added on top for a golden crust, but it didn't need it to feel complete. This was the kind of dish that waited patiently in the oven while chores were finished or prayers were said. It wasn't fancy, but it carried warmth in every bite, the kind of warmth that lingered long after the plates were cleared. For the Amish, this casserole was more than sustenance. It was a gesture of care, proof that even simple food could feel abundant. Every spoonful spoke of gratitude, of hands that worked and hearts that shared. Amish cabbage casserole was comfort, thrift, and togetherness baked into one perfect dish. Those kitchens are mostly quiet now. If one of these brought somebody back to yours, leave a comment and share this.